Hello, I'm Darren Shill, and I'm the co-founder of Liminal 11, and I'm at the UK Tarot Conference with Stephen Bright.
Hi.
Hello, Stephen.
Hi.
You had a good weekend?
Yeah, it's been great. It's been a really, really nice time. It's been a quieter affair here than it has been in previous years, which I've really enjoyed because it's given me more time to just sit down and get to know people.
Yeah. So to give some sort of numbers to that, I think normally we have about sort of 100 people here.
Yeah, it's usually 120 or
120.
something like that, and it's about half of that right
Yeah,
now.
exactly. Yeah, somehow the spirit is still very much alive.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
And it doesn't feel as an experience sort of an awful lot less than normal. So fantastic job by Kim Arnold organising this. So we're here to talk today about this wonderful publication about to come out in November. It's the Oracle Creator, see my face, by Stephen Bright. Fantastic book. I'm going to give a quick summary, but I'm going to hand over to Stephen to properly explain. But it's basically with the explosion of interest in tarot and oracles, and particularly creating your own. I think the Kickstarter market is a great example of where people are picking this up and sort of running with it themselves. This is the book, the definitive book, to basically take you through from right from the beginnings in terms of organising and thinking about creating your deck, different ways of approaching, all the way on to publishing, whether that's self-published or through a mainstream publisher. But
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll let you...
I mean, to like go back, I don't know what year I met you. It must be about about 4 years.
About 4 years ago, I think.
4 years ago, and we started talking at the liminal stand, and then obviously go forward a few years, and you asked if I'd be interested in writing this book on creating a deck, whether it was Oracle or it was tarot. And because I've been in the position of having my decks published already, I was obviously really interested in doing that. But it became clear as we got into this that the book needed so much more than just looking at how it could be created. For me, good decks start before that in the planning stage. So I really wanted to spend some time looking into that, writing about how we plan an oracle. Why do we use it? Who are we going to use it for?
Sure.
And all the different ways that it might manifest. So the first bulk of the book really is about sitting down and considering it before you've even drawn a line, cut out a piece of collage, or taken a photograph. Because I think a lot of the time what happens is that people have some images already, and they kind of think to themselves, oh, well, that makes a good oracle. But that's not always necessarily so.
Sure.
So it's really good to kind of spend some time really making sure that this works. And then we went into looking at the different ways in which you could do that, the different mediums of oracles and tarots. So we had collage as an example, drawing, painting, photography, everything we could think of, computer-aided design, which is obviously something in the last 20 years that's become massive in terms of this industry.
It's a different approach completely to what it would have been back in the past, where there was photography, because I think some of the photography in here, does it go back to the 60s?
It goes back to the 60s, and it goes back to the very first, as far as we know, the very first photographic tarot, which was by B. Nettles.
Who was interviewed in the book.
Who's interviewed in the book.
That's amazing.
Yeah, really, really interesting insights. One of the things that is special about this book is that I have my own experience of writing books and being published, and of creating decks, but there's so much that I don't know, in terms of how certain people work, in terms of how some people have become published or printed their work. So
it's so diverse these days, and I think there's some fabulous pictures in here, full page colour pictures as well, which gives, and I think you can see the diversity of the different approaches to the deck in here, which it is astonishing when you see it within the space of one book, just how many different approaches there are, and within each they all have their own soul and their own style. I guess there is depending on whatever your skills are, there's a different way to kind of dig into this.
Of course. I mean, one of the things I mentioned in the book was that years ago I used to do work in schools as a practitioner, an art practitioner, working with young children through to sixth form young adults, and that I often heard, usually from people who didn't want to do anything, who would say, I can't draw.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's okay, because I've got a stack of magazines out here.
Yeah, yeah.
We're going to collage it. We're going to do something a little bit different. So there's always a different option. So I don't want this to be a book that people think is just about, oh, well, it's for those people who are gifted in some kind of art. It's for anyone, you know.
Fabulous, outstanding. I think you've got some examples here as well, talking about collages.
I do.
Some of the things you've done. So when did you create these?
These were just for, I did an Instagram challenge some years ago, and it was design a card a day.
Oh,
and I could have done, you know, sometimes I could have drawn them, but I quite liked the idea of using collage, because a lot of the time you're not always completely sure how something's going to turn around.
Sure.
And you have that kind of that wonderful moment when you move something or take something away and it just becomes something completely different.
Yeah.
So I just went through magazines, and in some cases, you know, some of them are a little bit more complex, but in cards like this one, which is Death, I just used two pieces, a background and a foreground image, and we have obviously this person here who appears to be dead, and then we have this pathway that goes towards a black doorway, you know, so you could look at that as the transformation after death to a new life.
Sure,
you
that
know,
change.
It's still there, but it's just a couple of images.
Yeah, it's very simple, but very
extremely
effective.
simple. Same here as well.
Yeah.
Chariot, you know, I found a boat and I found a nice picture by Monet, and you know, you don't have to be ridiculously complex with your images to create something that really invokes feeling. I mean, same here. I can't remember the name of this.
But you've basically
artist.
taken part of the
one guy,
Yeah.
you know, from a scene of hundreds,
Yeah.
and just placed him in this really isolated scene, you know, with just water in the background, contemplating to become the hermit. So
that is the hermit.
that's the hermit.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
It's great. It's very impressive. And I love what you were describing there, with that sense that you could move it around, get the composition together, and then kind of glue down to in terms of commitment. You know, you only have to do that at the last moment, as opposed to like an oil painting.
Of course,
where, you know, sure.
Of course. And sometimes, you know, the great thing about collage is if it doesn't work, you kind of unpeel it and pull it aside and use something else.
Yeah.
You know, and changing things around, playing about the scale, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That makes it really, it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
and that's the thing, really. You don't want this to be a chore.
No.
Because if it becomes a chore, then you're never going to finish it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it does take, and it does. You do need that commitment to see it through. It's not the sort of thing you want to sort of finish halfway and come back to. So.
And also, I think, you know, with anything, some people do invest a lot of time, but I think that when you do, sometimes the style over many years changes.
Sure.
So.
Yeah.
You know, it depends. For some people, that they'll want to create great oil paintings or something like that, you know, and I think there's still considerations. You know, you don't want to be doing it till you know, for 50 years or something.
Yeah.
But there's kind of tips and tricks in there for people, whichever they decide to, you know, whatever method they decide to go with.
So many media have been covered.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
great. That's great.
Yeah.
Speaking of different sort of approaches and different styles, I know you've got a couple of other, just to sort of show examples of other ways that.
I mean, you know, the thing that I always like, you know, in all of the books that I've written, is I like people to be resourceful. You know, I don't want people to have to go out and spend like hundreds of pounds on art kits and stuff, or, you know, really expensive materials. And these over here in the UK, you can get these packs of playing cards for £1. I think, you know, they're large playing cards. And in these cards, I just drew on them with biros.
Fantastic.
You know, nothing special.
Yeah.
But people loved them, and I've used them before. People love them. And the same here, old business cards. You know, I changed my telephone number, so these were redundant. And
Fantastic.
I sat and did little pencil sketches on them to make an oracle. You know, and I haven't got them all here, but you know, they shuffle nicely.
It's fun how you've explored different sort of scales as well. You know, to see. You know, this gives sort of a large image to reflect on.
Yeah. And
this is sort of portable and handy and sort of, you know, great to pick up and play with.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And it's good, you know, to be a bit spontaneous and try things out.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't, you know, whatever you choose, it doesn't have to be the final thing. You know, you might try collage and then feel that you don't like it. You might want to do some pencil sketches, or add a little bit of ink in, or you might want to combine the two. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
you know, you can work into your collages with pens and markers and what have you, paint.
Yeah.
You know.
So one of the reasons we approached Stephen for many reasons to create this. You've got a vast background, having created your own decks as well, and been published and very well received, and written on tarot as well. You were an obvious choice, but the other reason we thought you're a fabulous choice is that how well connected you are in the tarot world, and that really has sort of come through in here with some of the incredible interviews you've achieved. So you mentioned Beer Nettles earlier, an absolute legend in the tarot world. Who were some of the other people that you sort of contributed
We have
here?
Amy Zerner and Monty Faber. Now you're testing my memory.
No, go for it. Have a look.
What else do we have? We have Rosario Salerno. We have Lynn from US Game Systems.
Yes.
We have yourself.
Have
we
myself.
Have
Caitlin Matthews, I think, as well.
Caitlin Matthews. Andre Aste and Neil Kelso.
Yeah.
So it's very varied. You know, we
Yeah.
we have all different kinds of people with all different kinds of specialities and experience in here. And you know, I've been around for a while now, and it's meant that I've built up my my friends in this industry. So it was a case of, you know, in some cases I had to contact people, but in other cases, like the creators of the Fountain Tarot, I already knew Jason.
Sure.
So it was somebody I could just kind of pop a message to and say, you know, are you up for doing this?
There's not many people in the tarot. I mean, it's a tight community. You know, with events like this, the UK Tarot Conference is a tight community, but at the same time, there's not many people who have a contact list as broad as you. So I think it's quite impressive. So, having sort of spoken to the great and the good, what were some of the surprises that came out from these interviews?
I think it was people's stories, really, because there was things in people's experiences that I hadn't expected them to share. So there's one example where a lady was talking about creating a deck, not because she wanted to get it published, not for any other reason apart from the fact that she had failing eyesight. So she needed a pack of cards that she could actually see.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, something that was interesting. And then we have a few different people in there. One person who suffered from postnatal depression and used the creation process as a way of healing.
Yes. That's a common theme, I think. You know, we discussed
there was a couple of people in there that did that.
It seems, and it's effective. And I think the wonderful thing about that sort of situation is there's healing for yourself in creating the deck, and then you're sort of passing on that tool,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the other one was, you know, somebody who was coping with grief as well. So grief, she painted how she felt at the time.
Yes, yeah.
And she poured all of that into the cards. So it's healing her, and now it's still there. It's still something that's alive in the world that she can continue to, you know, look at and spend time with.
Yeah.
She's, I mean, you know, we continue to grieve just in different ways.
Sure, no, it's incredible. No, it's the power of the creation process, as much as what you're producing at the end, is an incredible thing. And I think, you know, you've created a deck, I've created a deck. I think there's a depth to the relationship you have with oracles and tarot that is perhaps different at the end as a result of going through that creative process. You feel somewhat closer.
Yeah. I look at this is probably the first full deck that I created, and this is something that I made just really as a personal project, really, and something that was just for myself. And I wanted to get an all-male deck because I'd seen so many all-female decks.
Sure.
You know, there's loads of those out there, but I couldn't find one that fitted for me. You know, that suited my tastes. And also one, you know, I found a lot of the male decks out there were very much based on sexuality, and I just wanted it to be an all-male deck.
Sure.
So I created this on Photoshop. It's called the Fragments of an Illusion Tarot. It never became published, even though people did ask for it to be, because of the fact that I'd got images from a whole range of sources, and not all of them would have been right for printing.
So copyright issues and
Copyright
things, yeah,
issues
sure,
would have been an issue. But you know, at the time that wasn't my reason for doing it.
No.
The great thing that this gave me, apart from another deck to play with, was it gave me the confidence to do it again, because once I'd finally finished it, I felt like I'd made that crossover.
Yes.
You can do it now,
Yeah.
and I went on to do it again and then again.
You can now, within your own mind, you could see yourself as a tarot creator now.
Yeah.
So,
Rather than somebody just puts things on the back burner all the time, which is, you know, what I did. But you know, in terms of things like the court cards, if you're learning the tarot, as an example, you are in a position where you go and seek out images that make sense to you.
it's interesting, and I think when we created the Lunar Soul, I'd be opening up a newspaper, or I'd be sat on the bus, wherever you'd be, and you start seeing people or in events that kind of connect, particularly court cards.
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's very easy. Your world kind of changes as a result of going through this.
And also looking at other people's decks, because as much as you have an idea of what you want in a deck, you can kind of look around and say, well, you know, as much as that might fit for other people, it doesn't work for me. So you kind of make adjustments to suit yourself. You know, in this deck, the queens are all nurturers, and we have a guy with his child here working on the computer. You know, he's working at home perhaps, but he's still got the kid there as well, and that kind of worked with my idea of what the Queen of Pentacles would be like.
It's interesting what you're saying there about looking around other decks for inspiration. I think that's an important thing, and I think that's something that this helps with as well, the Oracle Creator, and there's so many sort of wonderful, and it's incredibly varied. Even within the space of this book, we all know that the tarot and oracle worlds have produced, you know, an immense variety, but it really jumps out sort of, you know, within here with some, you know, fantastic sort of different styles that are sort of shown.
I think if you're starting out as well, it kind of gives you an opportunity. You know, if you're going to take one card and look at the symbolism in about, you know, 5 cards and see. I think it's mentioned in there. Jason was saying about how he had on the wall you know, cards just pinned up onto the wall from about 5 or 6 different decks, and he was kind of like, you know, what is the most common symbol in here? You know, what have what has somebody put in that isn't anywhere else? And he kind of thought about that. You know, what must we keep in this deck to keep it traditional, and what can I add to make it our own?
What's the essence?
Yeah.
And what do I bring? I get out. It's brilliant. Yeah.
I think, you know, the one thing we haven't talked about is the fact that past the creation phase, and we go into publishing, which was never part of our original idea, and
yet so essential.
It is, because I think you can't finish that story if you don't talk about, you know, how once I've done this, what do I do with it? You know, do I print it out? If so, how do I do that? Do I publish it? If so, how do I do that myself? Or what do I need to say to somebody else to make that an opportunity? You know, what do publishers want to see?
Sure. And
how do they expect me to pitch my deck to them?
It's interesting because it's the kind of information that you can't sort of intuitively know. It's the sort of thing that you do need somebody to give a bit of guidance
it's
on.
Kind of like that hidden thing, isn't it? You know, it's like behind the high priestess's cloth, you know, what are the rules to publishing? And people don't know, it's not written anywhere. Obviously people share it occasionally, but not so much. But here you can find that whole process from, you know, the idea through to the finished product.
And in the 21st century, of course, there's so many different ways. If you want to go into the publishing side of it, the barriers are not what they used to be.
No.
So do you have sort of examples from people who've done Kickstarter routes? Really?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why I have these standalone interviews in the book, is because there was much that was out of my own. It wasn't my own experience.
Sure.
So, you know, I've never self-published or kickstarted anything. So, you know, I'll go and find somebody who did. That was kind of part of what I wanted to do here. So I kind of bring in everybody's stories into this to give you the best story, you know, and not just the good stuff, but the difficult stuff too.
Yeah.
So people can share their mistakes or give you some warnings so that you don't make those mistakes too.
Frankly, that's where the value is. It's sort of understanding where the problems are as much as where to be successful.
Of course.
Because it can be expensive, you know. So
it can be, and I think, you know, if you pull a few wrong turns, they're going to be even more expensive.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Is there anything else that you'd like to sort of leave with people today on this? We've had this on our table for Liminal 11 at the UK Tarot Conference, and we had a few sample copies, so they weren't for sale, and it was probably the most demanded item that we had there. That I don't know how many people I've had to say, unfortunately, you're gonna have to wait for November. So I know the excitement's going to be out there for this book. But are there any sort of last words on this before we'll talk about sort of future projects as well?
Not really. I mean, I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I mean, and everybody at Liminal has been absolutely great. You know, everybody have pitched together to make this what it is. You know, from the creative design to the people that went and tirelessly went and sought out all the permissions for all the great pictures in the books. You know, it's the editing. I know I spent hours and hours with Eleanor editing that together, just both sitting there with our tea in different parts of the world, working for it to make sure that that it was the great thing about this is that the layout of the book is important too. We're not just looking at just straight text. It's kind of put in a way, it's displayed in a way where you get these kind of chunks of information, and you're given an opportunity to digest that.
Yes.
Or seek it out alone. You can seek out this thing about image searching, and we have exercises in here as well. So there are prompts. We have directories of symbols.
Brilliant.
Directories of cards you might want to use in your deck as well. Why they would be useful to have them in there, and how they could be interpreted. So
it's a true encyclopedia. I think it's going to be very hard for someone to come up with more of a definitive guide than this one.
Yeah.
No, fantastic. We're incredibly proud to publish. So looking on to future projects, is there anything that you're at liberty to discuss at this point?
I'm working on illustrations for an Oracle deck. And it's really crazy actually, because while I was doing it, there was a few times where this was sitting on the side and it was like, hang on a minute.
Where do I find out that cunning piece of information?
So I used it myself, but that's going to probably be a year or so down the track. I've got a book on divination coming out in November, which is similar to the first tarot book that I wrote with Quarto. But this is an overview of all different kinds of divination. But some of the ones that I've chosen are not ones that you find in main divination books.
It's quite broad.
Yeah, from shell reading to flower reading, button reading, witches' runes. What we've actually done is, because I've already written a book on tarot, that we don't have tarot in this book, but I talk about Lenormand reading, Kipper reading, playing card reading. So,
very different styles. Yeah.
And also ways in which you can do these things in the most affordable way you can.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go out and spend loads and loads of money.
It sounds utterly fabulous.
Thank
so we've got decks to come from you. We've got books to come from you.
Yep.
What more do we need? That's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I do have a few other ideas as well.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about that later.
In about 3 years. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great to talk.
Cheers.